Well, thank you for coming to the last talk of the day. Hope everyone has been enjoying their conference so far. I know I have. I don't know what's worse, last talk of the first day or the last talk of the conference, because that was me last time. All right. Well, my talk, contrary to the previous one, has nothing to do with tech or tech solutions whatsoever. This is mostly focused on refactoring strategies, principles to help companies put together projects so they can deliver value as you're refactoring your architecture. Right, my name is Usha Suryadevara, and I am a technologist at heart. I truly believe that technology can solve any and every problem when used the right way. I'm also the director of engineering at Drizzly. I am an adjunct professor at UF and do guest lectures every now and then. And I'm also the founder and president of a nonprofit dedicated towards advancing women in the tech industry. It stands for We Advance Tech Together. How many here have heard about Drizzly? Cool, well, I mean, after the pandemic, I thought a lot more hands will be up. But Drizzly is the largest online alcohol marketplace in the country. Drizzly helps bring millions of consumers like you and I together with thousands of retailers across the entire country. Retailers can be anyone. It could be your enterprise partners. It could be like a Total Wine, 7-Eleven, it could be ABC, or it could be your liquor store down the street who wants to digitize their inventory and sell alcohol online. It's great, just try sometime. Very convenient for those last-minute gifts. I know I have used it a lot for Father's Day gifts. The bear is very distracting, right? That's our new rebranded Drizzly bear. You'll see them all throughout the presentation. Usually I put a lot of memes, but this time I didn't really need to because I have the bear. How many here are either working on or have worked on monoliths, legacy apps? As expected, of course. Every company is bound to have an app that's been around for a long time. Monolith has gotten a little bit of a bad rep lately, but it is a perfectly acceptable architecture pattern that, in fact, is a natural way of putting an application together. Every company starts here, and then you build onto it. In fact, that's how the IDEs are designed, with this in mind. It's simple to develop, simple to deploy, and simple to scale. Granted, over time, as you're adding more and more features, your load grows, your users grow, it can get a little bit complex. It could get to a point where there's so much in it that it's difficult to understand for anybody just joining the company. And you have to obviously deploy the entire app for a small change. I mean, I'm not going to go into the details. Everybody understands the reasons why or what could possibly drive you away from a monolith and wanting to refactor. Now, how many here have been part of a monolith to microservices project? Oh, I expect a lot more hands. Don't worry, the rest of you will be part of it very soon, if you haven't already. It is a journey every company makes, for different reasons, however. Let's go over a few examples. Best Buy. Best Buy did this to address bottleneck for deployments. Every release, at some point, was taking the app down big time, and it took them hours to get it back up and running. So they took the time to refactor the monolith into services. Wix, they just couldn't stay up. Anything they touched was taking the whole thing down. So they refactored. Fair enough reason, right? Walmart. Walmart's site was just really old. They put the application together late 90s, early 2000s. And so they took the opportunity to re-architect the whole thing to accommodate mobile devices and smart devices. Netflix. People say this, there cannot be a talk without mentioning Netflix. I mean, a microservices talk without talking about Netflix, and I'll tell you in a minute why. Netflix, in 2008, I don't know if anyone here remembers, but there was a deploy that was done where an extra semicolon was released, and it took the entire site down for hours. They couldn't get it back up in time, and they lost a lot of money. It was right around the time, and I'm not surprised, honestly, because it was so tightly coupled that it took the entire system down. And that was right around the time when Netflix was wanting to scale. They could not create data centers fast enough to accommodate the demand that was coming in. So they decided to take the time and refactor the monolith into microservices. And they were one of the first ones to actually use such architecture style. They did this even before microservices architecture became a thing. And that is why everybody talks about Netflix as an example. And now they have an API gateway that powers like billions of requests per day. And they're doing just fine. I think they have about a little over 500 services. That's where they landed. Uber did the same thing. Drizzly is an Uber company. I was totally supposed to mention that earlier. And Uber did the same thing, except for operational issues. So how did all of these companies go through these projects? What strategy did they use? It could be anything, right? You can decompose, you can decouple, or you can rewrite. So decompose is extracting the service out completely. Decoupling is extracting out, but within the monolith, just divided just enough that it's helping you solve the problem at hand, but it's still in the monolith. It's still a single app. Or a big bang rewrite. Now, big bang rewrites are awesome. They're pretty safe. They're probably the fastest way to refactor out, but not practical in the sense, I mean, economically not practical at all. It'll cost, depending on the size of the monolith, of course, but it costs you a lot of money, so companies normally don't prefer big bang rewrites. But what strategy would you choose? It totally depends on the problem you're looking to solve. What is it that is driving the need for this refactor? Totally comes down to that. And couple that with what exactly is the business optimizing for? What are you trying to do? Deliver faster? Then you solve the problem a different way. And as a business, can you afford to just dedicate half your teams to refactoring this while the other half is focused on delivering value? Sure, then maybe rewrite is an option for you. But it totally depends on those factors. So I came across Chris Richardson's 6 principles of refactoring a monolith into services, and I found them extremely helpful. And following these at every step of the way of the project, and putting a roadmap together with these principles in mind will definitely allow a company to deliver value while re-architecting. So let's go through them. First one is the obvious one, right? Make the most out of your monolith. Almost all the time, the need for speed is what's driving this refactoring. So you don't really need to jump in and refactor it into services. Try to see if there's anything you can do to the monolith first. I mean, it's not an anti-pattern. It's a perfectly reasonable architecture. So why is the company slow in delivering value? It's possible that it's a dated software process. So try to improve the software process, development process. Put new process around to help teams be more effective and more efficient, to move faster. Maybe autonomous teams so they can make decisions, avoid all the overhead, cut the costs. And if the technology is obsolete, you always have the option of modernizing the whole thing. And I did what I did last year. I think it's okay. Sorry, I don't know if you can see, but the thing came off, whatever. So yeah, if the tech is obsolete and that's what you're struggling with, you could have a Perl app, a PHP app. Just try to modernize the whole thing as is. You don't really need to refactor it into services. Which leads us to the second principle, which is adopt microservices for the right reasons. Microservices is an architecture style. It's basically a short for our microservices architecture pattern. In short, everybody calls it microservices. It doesn't mean that the services have to be really tiny and are written for a single purpose, which at one point was defined that way. But anyways, it's an architectural style that structures an application as a set of loosely coupled services. So how do you get there? Every service in this architecture has to be highly maintainable and testable, independently deployable, ideally organized around business domain, and owned by dedicated product teams. So there's more to the architecture style than the tech and the choice of architecture. You have to change the company's process and policies to match the architecture style. So your teams, fine, you're focusing a team around, you have a dedicated team around the service. That's not enough. The teams have to be autonomous. They have to be using DevOps process. You have to have a way to continuously deliver value. Your CI/CD pipeline should include like maintainability and testability into it. And observability is one of the most important things. Like we heard, I don't know if everybody was here for the previous talk, but telemetry, like logging, metrics, dashboard, monitoring, alerts, all of these is like non-negotiable. Otherwise, your architecture can look like this. Your single request is jumping through hoops, going through multiple services. So you have to have all of these things in place to really, really understand what is happening. Because the architecture is inherently complex. It is a lot more complex than the monolith itself. The next principle, oh, sorry. I saw someone trying to take a picture. There we go. I can wait a minute. The next principle is migrate incrementally. This is a really good pattern, strangler pattern, where you take you identify the chunks you want to pull out into services, and you move one chunk at a time. And you use a strangler facade. So it could be an API gateway, your Nginx service, or a very thin service layer with built-in routing logic. So that way, when a request is coming in, if it is for the monolith, you route it there. If it's needs to go to the new service, you route it there. But the idea is you take one chunk at a time and just keep adding more and more services. The advantage of doing it this way is any new functionality that you need to build in, you can directly put it in the new service as opposed to building it into the monolith. So it helps with the tech debt. And the monolith just shrinks over time, and you repeat until it's completely eliminated. Depending on the size of the monolith, it could take years, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, it doesn't matter. I guess it matters to the business. But also completely depends on the business priority. Is that your topmost priority? Is everybody focused on doing just that? So it's extremely easy to say repeat until the monolith is eliminated. In reality, that's not the case. Is anyone here like a CEO or a CTO or, no? Okay. If you know anyone, don't take this personally, but there's always that code that a CTO put together that nobody wants to touch. That'll end up there forever because it works. It just magically works, and there's absolutely no need to touch it. So it's okay for the monolith to not be completely eliminated. Begin with end in mind. What does that mean? Knowledge transfer is extremely important. Everybody involved in the project has to have a really good understanding of the entire domain and have to understand the depth of the architecture. Only then can you actually properly come up with your services, identify service boundaries. So understanding the domain is the key. And if you have knowledge silos, go for knowledge transfer sessions, set up architecture deep dives, reviews, whatever works, but spread the knowledge before the project starts. Get everybody together to do an event storming session of some sort or a domain modeling session. The outcome of both sessions is very similar. You're just identifying all the services that your monolith can be broken down into, typically organized around business functionalities, and you're identifying the boundaries for each of the service along with the list of services, because you have to know which service is dependent on which service. Like you have to avoid dependencies. You need to avoid coupling. And it's not just runtime coupling, I'm also talking about design time coupling. Don't ever design a service where service A is waiting on service B to do something, and only then service A can continue on what it's doing. Use async communication as much as possible. I know it's easier said than done. Sometimes you just cannot avoid transactions, but try to do that for the most part. Once you have your list of services, your service boundaries defined, come up with a target architecture model. It could be whatever you want to do. Separate front end, separate back end, Go services, it doesn't matter. Come up with what that looks like and define it somewhere where everybody can see. And once you start using it, if that doesn't work for whatever reason, learn from it, be flexible, change it. A service per team is ideal. Only have more services if it is absolutely needed. At some point, there will be diminishing returns. Dedicating a team to a service is actually, it works really, really well. It's more effective and more efficient when getting work done, because these are dedicated teams that are empowered to make decisions, so you will move faster. Uber actually did this. When Uber went through their refactoring first round, they swung the pendulum all the way on the other side and ended up with 2,200 critical services. And it was not sustainable for them. So they went through round 2, where they took each of the service and they added another layer. They call it domain-oriented microservices architecture. It's actually what Drizzly is trying to do as well, is identify a domain per team. And every domain can have multiple services. It's completely up to the team to come up with how they want to model the domain. But the idea is there's one gateway, one entry point that other services are aware of, and that's it. So you just took out the complication from like 10 services to one domain boundary. The rest of the services need to worry about. And I totally meant to use this example later, but that's okay. Migrate high-value services first. Figure out what the return on investment for every single module is that you have identified. Understand the cost versus benefit of pulling it out of the monolith. So one thing you have to be careful about is typically modules with the highest ROI means you're going to be working in that functionality, a domain, more than anything else. So let's say e-commerce system, right? Orders domain. That is most of the times the most ROI, gives you the most ROI because there will be a lot of features you want to add to it. You want to touch that all the time. But the problem is, it is also the one domain that's very tightly coupled from the beginning to the end in all your workflows. So understand the cost of decoupling. Cost of decouplings for high ROI modules can be pretty high. So you have to take all of this into consideration when deciding exactly where you want to start. Success metrics. Always measure your success metrics. Identify what those metrics look like ahead of time. And no, it is definitely not the number of services. It doesn't matter it's 2,000 services or 5,000. It is a success only if you have improved on metrics like this. You're able to deliver faster. You have shorter lead time than you used to before. You're able to deploy 10 times a day versus once a month. Those are the type of metrics you want to look for, and that is what you want to measure. And there's other abilities, scalability, reliability, availability, all of this will go up as well when it's done right. Now for the interesting part. Every company takes this journey for a completely different reason, and yet somehow the lessons learned are very similar. It's very similar, actually. Companies seem to miss, including the ones I work for, seem to miss the same things all the time. It's very easy to get carried away, I guess, thinking that it's a technical problem, but it's not. Refactoring a monolith into services is a people problem. Teams always figure out the tech part. Like, tech is the easy part. Where companies need to spend more time is figuring out the people and the process, and the organization needs to change to match the architectural style. It's definitely a paradigm shift. The older ways of doing things won't work. You cannot walk up to a team and say, hey, can you deploy? I just need this out really fast. Works great when you have 10 engineers. It will not work when you have 200 engineers. Teams need to scale. Teams need to be able to make decisions on their own. They need to be able to work async. There has to be processes in place. You have to identify team boundaries. You have to identify interfaces. You need to create some kind of, I just realized I again skipped my examples. But yes, define team boundaries and interfaces so teams are able to function async very effectively and move faster. Everything comes down to that. Monolith is not bad culture. So somehow, when teams start working on this project, there is this notion that's set across teams that, oh, I'm working on the services. It's a lot cooler. I want to continue working on that. I don't want to work on the monolith. That's not going to work. Your monolith is extremely important. That is what got you here so far. That's what kept the company going. You still need to dedicate resources. So if anybody sees such a culture such behavior or dialogue happening anywhere, just refocus everybody. Everything is important. This is what the company needs you to do. How you drive adoption matters. You cannot go to a team and say, I want you to refactor into a microservices architecture. That is the how. That is how you're solving a problem. Talk to everybody about what it is that you're trying to solve. Because architecture style is a how. Explain the what and the why. Explain how it's helping. What you're doing is going to help. Don't focus on the architecture style itself. In other words, avoid mandates. Get the support of business. These projects are typically run as an engineering project, but that is not going to work. Because time spent on working towards these projects, this refactoring project, is time that we're taking away from delivering features. Time that we could be spending making more money. There's very rarely a short-term payoff. It is almost always a long-term payoff with services refactoring. So include business. In fact, if you can get business to lead this entire project, it's going to be better. Because they are in the front lines. They are the ones answering your customers. They are the ones talking to them about why we're not delivering any features. Also, if engineering and product are working together to put this roadmap together, the adoption of this project looks completely different. I mean, take this for example. Improving testability. Business can put an entire business plan around why improving testability will make you money. I mean, improving testability means fewer bugs, lower support calls, costs, and it improves customer satisfaction and retention. They can pull numbers together from past examples, but somehow they do magic. I've seen them do it. They'll put a business plan together, and it's easy. It's important to get everybody aligned around that business plan, especially if the business plan is making money. I mean, why not? Accelerated development. This is another thing that is going to happen when you refactor a monolith into services. It's going to help you develop features faster. Your development's faster, right? Which also means you're competitive in the market. You're making more money. But this also means business can run more examples. You're able to fail fast. You're able to move fast. So what did they say, stats? At best, 62% of product ideas are useless. They don't work. That means that's how many examples you want to be able to run to get to something that'll actually work for your business. So work with product and put a profitable business plan together. Adopt a decision-making framework. This is extremely important. You'll have to make a lot of decisions when you're in the middle of this refactoring project. None of them are going to have 100% alignment or good. You just have to pick the best bad decision that you're discussing. When you do that, make sure it is very well documented and written down as to what trade-offs were made and why we landed on the worst option 3 versus the option 1 or whatever. The idea here is, when I say the best bad decision, you can get to your ideal decision with 100% alignment, but don't spend time churning on decisions. Make a decision and move fast. And worst case, you'll go back and implement option 2 later, but try to move forward, because the idea is you're moving fast and you're failing fast. RFC process is a really good one. Is anyone familiar with the RFC process? It's similar to the conference requests for whatever, no, CFP, I guess, whatever. But the idea is you document, so let's say I want to push a standard or something together, or I want engineering to stop doing things a certain way and do it a different way. I'm just going to document that whole thing. There's a pre-existing template that companies typically follow. You post it out there, Confluence, Google Drive, whatever works. Post it out there and ask for comments. So people have to engage in comments, and that is where you actually come to a decision. DAISY is a decision-making framework. This actually works better, and we started using that once we started doing the refactoring work. It's very similar. You document all your options, and you explain how you arrived at this decision. And for every option, you put like pros and cons and trade-offs made. And you figure out, and you also have timeline listed for every option. And then you share that with everyone, and there's a discussion happening around it, and then a decision is made. The concept's the same. Broadcast your decisions. Make sure everybody is aligned around the decision. This really helps even people joining the team later to understand why that third best bad decision was made. Scale changes everything. Yep?
I'm trying to look up this
RFC?
RFC. Is it request for comments or
Yes.
request for change?
Request for comments.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. In a way, request for change works too, but it's request for comments. Scale changes everything. As your business grows, your number of users grow, you're adding a lot more features, and your operational load increases. Most cases, it's still that same team that is maintaining a lot more right now than they used to before. So invest in operational excellence. This is going to help a lot, and I know I've already said this. Loosely coupled teams. Avoid team dependencies where possible. Again, I'm going to go back to my e-commerce example. There's a stores team, orders team, and payments team. It's great. They're very decoupled, and they're working in their own domain. But there's also things that everybody has to do, which is deploy at the same time. Let's say they all want to deploy at the same time. So you need to have some kind of a system where inter-team dependencies have been identified as well. Like you have your CI/CD pipeline, you have your DevOps process, everything identified. Your teams have your boundaries. Define what every team does ahead of time. And these teams have to be empowered to make their decisions, autonomous teams, and that's how they can run fast. Another model that companies invest in is ops team. Having a dedicated ops team that is responsible for bugs, taking care of incidents, and keeping the lights on works really well. It's really efficient. Although not many small companies prefer to do this because, again, it's not exciting to just do maintenance work. Still needs to happen though. Another model is SRE team, a team dedicated to maintaining the reliability, site reliability. They're the ones putting dashboards, metrics, logging, everything together. Regardless, it's a good idea to have observability completely nailed, solid. And then align priorities at the company level. Typically, teams in companies are either organized around your user base or your products or services, right? And you have company goals, and every team comes up with how their priorities are for the next quarter or next whatever planning, yearly planning, 6 months planning, or quarterly planning. You come up with what every team's goals are and make sure they are aligned to the company goals. In fact, flip it around. You have your company goals, come up with what the top priorities for the company are, and align your teams towards those priorities. So reprioritize and shift resources to match those priorities. This helps. This is an easier way to optimize for exactly what the business needs. So try that. This one's new for me, but it actually works. I think I ran through it really fast. If it hurts, don't do it. You don't have to go through the complete project in the initial plan that was put together. Microservices architecture is very complex, and it is not for everyone. So that is why everywhere I kept saying learn and evolve and change, because what worked for one company is not going to, or might work, but most likely will not work for another company. Every company's journey is their own. So make sure you learn and you evolve everywhere and make changes. So if this architecture is not working, it's not because the architecture isn't working, it is because of the decisions that were made along the way. So take a step back and rethink exactly which part is it that's not working, and try to transform your architecture to fix that, to address that. I already talked about the Uber example. They swung the pendulum all the way. They came back with a halfway microservices architecture, and that works great for that company. So yeah, do whatever is needed. Move responsibilities from one service to another. Replace a service with a shared library if needed. Eliminate that service completely. And merge services if that works better. Or go for coarser grained services. Don't go for maybe orders and something else together is one service. And that is what works better for your company. But pay attention to those details. All else fails, use the monolith architecture. There's nothing wrong with it. And if you have already worked towards fixing the process, the organization, and the policies to help with the microservices architecture, you have already made your software development process better. You already have your CI/CD pipeline. You're already moving faster. So maybe it's okay that you just pulled out 2 chunks from the monolith. Leave the rest alone. Because you're looking at cost versus benefit at every step. So maybe there is no benefit in continuing to completely extract the functionality out. I really ran through it fast. So this is going to be very redundant information, only because it is extremely important. Refactoring is not a one-size-fits-all. Or refactoring a monolith into services is not a one-size-fits-all. Everybody has their own journey. Evaluate cost versus benefit at every step and optimize for business impact. Sometimes cost of decoupling is going to be extremely high for your services with most ROI. So keep that in mind, take that into consideration. Adopting microservices architecture without changing the process, policies, and organization will not work. It is a paradigm shift that needs to happen, and everybody needs to be aligned around it. And sometimes a hybrid approach works best. And this is the most important part. Don't afraid to break a golden rule. Understand the trade-offs. There are a lot of practices, patterns, ideal solutions out there that might not work for you. It's okay to break a rule or two to adjust it so it works better for your company, because your trade-offs are your own.